Rivalry games are meant to bring the best out of two teams. Unfortunately, for most of the afternoon, we didn't see that from Ole Miss, but a win is a win, and you'll definitely take it over Mississippi State. Welcome on into the SEC Unfiltered postgame show. He's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson, bringing out everything that we saw out at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium as the Rebels secure a 26-14 victory in the Egg Bowl over the Bulldogs. Real quickly, if you like the video, hit that ring notification down below and make sure you hit subscribe because we're talking SEC football leading up into rivalry week, throughout next week up to the conference championship, and throughout the college football playoffs. This is your number one source for all things SEC. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get podcast listening systems. Follow us on the social, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, SEC Unfiltered. Follow Dave at Mock10 Sports, me at Mr. Cole Thompson, and check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. This show is brought to you by our friends over at Roback. Black Friday is upon us, and start your rivalry weekend off watching football right here on SEC Unfiltered. For starting the holiday season off, like going to Roback.com and use the promo code SECU for 20% off your first purchase. Joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. The holidays, it's a great stocking stuffer. There are people in your life that would appreciate a nice Roback pullover. I'd appreciate a nice Roback pullover. They would appreciate a nice Roback pullover. Your family, your best friends, your mortal enemies, best of bros would too. Go to Roback.com and use the promo code SECU for 20% off your first purchase. For the 66th time, Ole Miss claims the golden egg. For the 4th time in 5 years, Lane Kiffin claims the golden egg. And now, you gotta just sit and wait. You'll wait for chaos to occur. You'll wait and hope that other teams will fumble the bag to catapult you into the conversation for a 12-team postseason picture. And Dave, this was a roller coaster of emotions. I get it. It was senior day. You got to go ahead and throw rivalries aside. You got to go ahead and just let the game unfold actually on the field for 4 quarters. But I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. This was a very slippery game for Ole Miss. It never felt like that they were able to capitalize. It never felt like they were able to pull away. And I understand definitely emotions got the best of you. And I was about ready to come on here and start hooping and hollering because of this was an Ole Miss team that has shown us throughout the season how good they are. But then I had to remind myself, they also have shown us at times this year how optimistically underwhelming they have been. And when you put the two together, that has been Ole Miss football 2024.
Yeah, that was the most expensive 9-3 season of all time. And I say that all the time. I truly believe of all time because we haven't been in this era for a while. And no one paid anywhere from $12 to $14 million before for a 9-3 roster. So it is what it is. I took Mississippi State plus 25 in this one. I thought it would. I wouldn't say close is probably the word. And I'd probably say I thought Ole Miss would probably win by a little more. I thought it'd be probably closer in the 17 range, if I'm being honest. But I don't know. I mean, you never again 9-3 season at Ole Miss. Traditionally, you go win your bowl game, 10 wins. That's back-to-back 10-win seasons. Cannot be disappointed with that at Ole Miss. But as we say on the show all the time, 2 things can be true at once. You can also be disappointed specifically for the 2024 season. Now, you just with as much money as you spent, all the guys you had back, some of the transfers you brought in, the losses to Kentucky and Florida will linger. Was probably expecting a little bit of a better performance overall outside the scoreboard from Ole Miss. But no, I mean, you take it. It is what it is. I mean, I thought from a Mississippi State perspective, they could have been a little bit more aggressive overall in play calling, game plan. If I was a Mississippi State fan, good. We didn't get blown out. And I'll say this. Jeff Levy's the king of not getting blown out on the road this year. And I think they probably had the 4 toughest league road games of anyone. Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss, and who am I missing? Oh, Georgia.
Georgia.
I mean, they probably had the toughest road slate of anyone in the league. But the 12-game conference losing streak continues. I mean, me and you were on board with this all year, Cole. We both weren't fans of Mississippi State really rolling into the season from a 2024 perspective. They underachieved, in my opinion. I think we're talking about 2 underachieving teams. Thought you could have got a conference win at this point. But you know what? If you're Ole Miss, you just hope and pray a lot of things go your way tomorrow. And who knows? You got a shot. But at this point, out of the things you control, you won 9 out of your 12 games. Again, before we move on, I think from Ole Miss history's perspective standpoint, you go win your bowl game, you get 10-3. Great 2-year span, specifically for the 2024 season. You left a lot of meat on the bone.
It's a great 2-year span because if you consistently are going to get to double digits, the problem is that also you did more with less last year and you invested so much, tens of millions of dollars into the NIL collective to get to that next stage. You weren't satisfied with that Penn State victory in the Peach Bowl. You weren't satisfied with finishing in third place in the SEC. You weren't satisfied being called the most dangerous 2-loss team in the country that should have gotten into the college football playoff. You weren't satisfied with how the season went in a loss against Georgia. And then again, you talk about this team, and we saw a roller coaster of what the 2024 season was for me in this matchup to kind of get us a good indication of what Ole Miss football was. They were down early. They allowed Michael Van Buren to slice and dice and Kevin Coleman to boogie scoot into the end zone. We watched as this offense was not able to kind of find an identity, and they settled for a field goal. They weren't able to really get that big breakaway moment until we saw the Ulysses Bentley 92-yard touchdown run. They weren't able to capitalize until late in the fourth quarter when Caden Prieskorn, who many of us thought was going to be the all-SEC tight end of the year, finally showed you why.
No, he wasn't even the best tight end on the team this year. I thought Daquan Wright was more productive throughout the year.
Most of the time he wasn't. I think we can both agree with that, but we also saw how this team is able to capitalize and put up points. We saw how this team was able to feast against inferior opponents, and more importantly, against talented opponents. Georgia, South Carolina. Dave, if I would have told you that in those 2 games alone, they allowed 4 total sacks and 7 tackles for losses, I think many people would be shocked simply because if you look at that defensive line of South Carolina and you look at that defensive line for Georgia, and you say to yourself, no, that's impossible. You know, this is an offense that allowed 8 tackles for losses and 2 sacks today. I'm sorry. There's just no way that we can go ahead and agree that these two see eye to eye. And then I tell you this stat, and this is the part that's really infuriating. In games against Kentucky, LSU, Florida, and Mississippi State, they've allowed 16 total sacks and 32 tackles for losses. So against quality opponents, they're waking up and they're delivering on their promise. Last dance, leave no doubt. And then in performances against inferior competition, against competition that you should never be going into a dogfight with, you're struggling. And I think that's the part that's really going to sink in for a lot of these seniors that decide to come back. It's going to sink in for a lot of people that were on the coaching staff that believed that this year was going to be different. Because it was. You got over that hump. You got that signature win at home against a team like Georgia. You were able to capitalize and beat up on a Heisman Trophy winner last year in Jaden Daniels. But here we are still looking at the finite little details. And a miscommunication on 4th down cost you Kentucky. A miscommunication on 4th down cost you the Florida game. A miscommunication on 4th down, Aaron Anderson in the back of the end zone. LSU sends it to overtime. Mississippi State, you're in for 4 quarters. It's just, this is what Ole Miss football has been in 2024. And it's really frustrating because of when the highs are high, I still stand on it. Somebody asked me a couple days ago, hey, Cole, do you still believe this is the best team in the SEC? Yes, I do. I do believe it. When they're at their peak, this is the best team in the SEC. I don't deny that. But I also know that this team has shown me at times this year, they aren't the best team when things start to go south. And unfortunately, that becomes a problem when it comes to the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee. And that becomes a problem when it comes to settling on wins. 9-3, we've talked about many a time. I'm not sure if one's going to get in. I can tell you what, of all the teams that are in that running, South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, the one with the best win is probably Alabama, or it's probably Ole Miss. The one with the worst loss, no questions asked, is Ole Miss.
Yeah. I mean, again, I doubt Ole Miss gets in the playoffs. I think probably the best shot is Alabama. Again, now if Clemson, South Carolina goes out there and looks really impressive against Clemson, then we have a conversation from that perspective that they may jump Alabama. But I think when you factor in brand, the head-to-head, Alabama get the nod. But specifically Ole Miss in this season, I mean, I think this goes back to it's Lane Kiffin. I really don't know why we're surprised. Again, I think this was the fear everybody had going into the season of this team. When you bring in that many guys into a program for 1 year and there's no real – I'm not going to say there's not a culture because everyone has a culture. Some are good, some are bad. I think just this culture leads to inconsistencies and not attention to details. And you totally expect guys like Walter Nolan and Princely Umanmielen to step up against Georgia. Yeah, I mean, it's just like Kentucky. Deion Walker plays every great game in the world against the best teams. He does. He plays phenomenal, just like those two. But when they're playing Mississippi State, Princely Umanmielen does not give a crap about the Egg Bowl. Let's call a spade a spade. It has no connection. Probably couldn't even tell you what city Mississippi State's in. I mean, they don't. When you're in this era, unfortunately, these kids don't care about that rivalries much. Maybe the day of they do, but it doesn't sit there 365 days a year like we'd see with some kids probably 10 years ago. It doesn't sit, I mean, Walter Nolan doesn't care about the AWOL. I feel like in this game, this screamed a letdown game to me. Just like why I think it'll be a potential letdown for Alabama tomorrow against Auburn. Your season was over a week before. And I mean,
technically it's not over, but it's out of your control.
Everything out of your control.
Yeah.
So internally to them, it's over. I mean, from that perspective, we can't control it. I mean, we got to cheer for a lot of teams. I mean, we're going to be cheering for every SEC, ACC team that's not playing SMU or Miami or Clemson. But no, I mean, I think when you invest this much in that perspective, from an NIL perspective, you bring in that many new kids into your program, there's going to be inconsistencies. I just think there is. We all thought the schedule broke their way. I mean, even looking back on it now, hindsight 2020, now we've played for Ole Miss 12 games, 11 for most teams. The schedule to me still was very beneficial. I mean, I'm trying to think. South Carolina ended up being much better than people thought that were on Ole Miss.
Florida ended up being a lot better at the end of the day.
Florida at the end of the year, you're right. That was another team that ended up. LSU, at least to me, was about what I thought they would be. So, I mean, that was it. I mean, and who am I thinking left of their schedule? Kentucky, I probably thought was going to be a little better, Cole, honestly.
I mean, I think we all did. But, Dave, let's just call it like it is. When you look back at that Kentucky game, that was when there was no margin for error. They had to be able to capitalize. They couldn't afford to lose 2 games, whether it was to South Carolina and Georgia, Florida and Mississippi State, LSU and Oklahoma. They couldn't afford to lose 2 games. That was the bottom line. Because of the Kentucky loss at that point, I think when you watch back at the South Carolina game and the instability that we saw in that Georgia game in week 3, the unequivocalness to go for it on 4th down. And then Mark Stoops decides to drop his nuts and say, hey, Brock Vandagriff, go for it on 4th and 6 and connect on a 57-yard bomb to Dane Key. I mean, like, that was the moment where I think
the difference between today's game and the Kentucky game was the 3 turnovers Mississippi State committed.
Yeah.
Kentucky didn't turn the football over that day.
The other thing that was really important is that in that Kentucky game, they only went for it twice on 4th down. You went for it 4 times on 4th down, and you converted on 75%. That kept drives alive. Again,
yeah, I agree with that today. Mississippi State's defense, man.
But you had to. I mean, at the same time, and I give a lot of credit to Jeff Levy. I want to continue to talk about Ole Miss real fast, but I do want to give a shout out to Jeff Levy. Yes, you could have been more aggressive, but the fact that you went for a fake punt deep in your own territory, connected, and then got onto the board because of it, more power to you. The 4th and 5 play that was able to get on in for the 34-yard score on that little bubble curl route. Good play.
How do you not go for it though? Ole Miss is 45 late in the game, down 6, and
how do you not? Because unfortunately they don't want to give them any opportunity, and I don't understand it. But again, Jeff Levy, first-year coach, it's a learning lesson. You and I can both agree on this one. You're 2-10 on the year. You're not going to a bowl game.
Oh, dude, I would have emptied the tank today if I was them.
Why not?
I mean, you're fighting for your 3rd win.
It's your Super Bowl, and you're fighting for your first conference win, and guarantee keep Ole Miss out of the playoff. But, let's talk about Ole Miss. Ole Miss's defense came to deliver after that opening drive. When they were down, it eventually became, what was it, 14 to 7. You nearly were able to watch as the floodgates came on open. 14-10 after the first quarter. And then Ole Miss's defense decided to wake up and choose violence. And again, that's the version of Ole Miss that we expected to see all year. One that was able to eliminate the rushing attack. One that was able to contain quarterbacks from maneuvering outside the pocket. One that was able to close the gap in the passing attack. And then force turnovers. And you saw players that were here that kind of stepped on up and gave you big-time performances, whether it be with turnovers, whether it be with big-time interception. I mean, the opening drive, the fact that you were able to get a big interception by Chris Paul to set up a field goal for Caden Davis, I thought that was going to set the tone. It was. And I thought at that point, this is why Ole Miss is waking up. Because if it's senior day, you're at home, you're trying to show out, you're trying to get those brownie points, you're trying to show everybody we still are one of the most dangerous teams. But to be fair, I give a lot of credit to Ole Miss's defense, but that offense was pitiful today. And honestly, if there's any person that should be excited, elated at this point to talk about a player, it's South Carolina fans when it comes to Juice Walls. How you drop that easy pass inside of the end zone, how you don't make that play, and how you don't show up. Dave, that's where I kind of agree with you in senses of I don't believe that players don't care because they want to close out games, but they don't understand what the magnitude of these rivalries are. The Egg Bowl is a top 15 rivalry in the sport, and those who grew up in the state those who understand the balance of what this game is about, they get and they will be there for 4 quarters. But you don't know what this game is about. So why are you going to try and make a big time catch right at the red zone that puts you in the end zone or at least at the 1 yard line? I thought that was one of the worst plays. And he has been probably the biggest disappointment of all the transfers so far this year, at least from those that we expected to have a more significant role.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, he would have been for sure the wide receiver 1 at South Carolina. Even right now, I would say he'd be true wide receiver 1 for him. So I don't really
100%.
know. I guess Beamer came out and said he didn't believe in Lenore Sellers, but I guess that was his thing. I mean, to be fair to the kid going in, Jackson Dart was more proven than Lenore Sellers. I mean, everything's hindsight 2020. But to be fair to the kid, he's got
to show up.
Yeah, but I see why the kid left. I mean, I don't understand why Shane Beamer was baffled by that. He got more money and he played with a more productive quarterback.
Sure. But when you get more money, you also have to show up, and that's the problem. And
I don't think anybody's denying that, though. Yeah, he didn't have a good year. 100%. No. Who's saying he did?
No, I'm just saying in general that this is a guy that he's been the most underwhelming. How do you not make that play?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Ole Miss fans would tell you that. I don't think anybody's arguing that.
Jackson Dart gets a big time touchdown at the end of the game. Caden Prieskorn closed out the year as the all-time leading passer for Ole Miss. I mean, when you look back, I think that's a big deal still. Like, I understand that this is going to be a 9-3 season. You're probably not going to go to the college football playoff unless chaos occurs. But you have to realize that this is a record that hasn't been broken in 20 years. And the reason why people even looked at Ole Miss as a primetime destination, why they believe that Ole Miss could be a place where you can win, why Ole Miss could be a place where we could have sustainable success, is because the quarterback. You live and breathe by quarterback play, especially in today's college football playoff. I've talked about this many a time. I truly think that in today's game, to be successful, you need depth and you need a quarterback that can elevate you. Jackson Dart did. I mean, Jackson Dart, I think, was the selling point for many a folk to come join the SIP over the last 2 years. And that needs to be celebrated. 143 yards in the day, not really great on third down. They were very, very underwhelming. But still, you get into the end zone, you close your tenure out with a couple of big-time runs, you convert to be able to get that 4th down, and you get to celebrate with your coach. I feel like that even though we're going to talk about how this has been a very underwhelming year for for Ole Miss, we still have to give consideration. This is a good quarterback that gave everything he could to this team and tried to single-handedly, even last week before the 4th quarter debacle, he was the reason why Ole Miss stayed in that football game out the swamp.
Yeah, I think Jackson Dart's an all-time great Ole Miss player, even without, obviously the all-time passing yards help. In my lifetime, he's probably the second best quarterback in Ole Miss history. You obviously got Eli Manning, Jackson Dart. Ole Miss fans may disagree. I don't know, Romero Miller probably who was in front of Eli Manning. I don't know, Jevin Sneed was pretty good. R.I.P. to Jevin Sneed. But overall, Jackson Dart, just how he was with the program for 3 years, you saw him develop. Lane Kiffin, whether he'd admit it or not, brought in Spencer Sanders to beat out Jackson Dart. There was big collision between Jackson Dart and Jackson Dart's dad and Lane Kiffin just butting heads those first 2 years. And now they become close. You like to see it. It is a good story overall. It is like, man, just Jackson Dart kind of like is the few, the proud in today's era. It sits and stays. I know he transferred from USC, but still, like, I don't think of USC when I think of Jackson Dart now.
I don't think anybody does.
You know what I mean? Like, if you said Jackson Dart, you're not like, oh, yeah, the USC transfer. You're like, no, dude, the guy played at Ole Miss, the all-time leading passing leader. Again, one of the all-time great Rebels. Did he win a championship? No. But I think when you think of the Lane Kiffin era, whenever that ends at Ole Miss, Jackson Dart will kind of be the face of that era, at least for me as we stand right now.
Dave, let me ask you, when you think of Baker Mayfield and what he was able to accomplish, do you bring up Texas Tech?
No, I think of Oklahoma.
When you think of Joe Burrow and his success during his 2 years down at LSU, do you bring up Ohio State? Do you bring up Quinn Ewers at Ohio State? No, you bring up the place where he became an icon and a big-time factor.
Cole, do you think of Oklahoma when you think of Jalen Hurts? Do you think Alabama?
I think both, personally, because of one, he got to the Heisman Trophy presentation.
Yeah, and they went to the playoffs.
So he is the one few that I'm allowed to say you can claim both, and I'm not going to judge you either way. Like Sam Hartman, I don't think of him as the Notre Dame quarterback. I think of him as the Wake Forest quarterback that had
With
one
Dave
final
Clawson.
year.
Yeah.
That's what I think of. And then, like the same thing, like I don't think of who is it? Kenneth Walker, who won the Doak Walker when he was at Michigan State. I don't remember his tenure at Wake Forest. I remember him for what he did during that tenure when he was there. So it's like little things like that. You remember for what they did. And you also remember that this is a team that was the most explosive offense for the last 3 years. And that's not me telling you this. This is what numbers back up and say. It has been the most explosive offense in the SEC for the last 3 years. And it was catapulted by a quarterback that really set the tone, at times had really good receiver play, at other times was underwhelming. And today, again, not at full 100% capacity, wielded his team. There are a couple things I do want to bring up. Dave, I was very frustrated in this game when they didn't utilize Ulysses Bentley. And then finally, when they did, he's off to the races for a 91, 92-yard touchdown run. And I'm saying to myself, where was that last week? Because of also this game today was the most rushing yards in a single performance. The most rushing attempts in a single performance by Ole Miss this season. And if you just do that and somehow you're able to capitalize and get a couple of big-time first down runs against Kentucky, against LSU, against Florida, maybe we're not even in this situation, and we're talking about how Ole Miss at this point has catapulted itself into the conversation, no questions asked college football playoff team. Like, it's just infuriating. And then also, what was the problem with Ulysses Bentley? Why wasn't he playing more last week? Why wasn't he playing more in other games? Those are just some things that are going to come back, I think, to bite Lane Kiffin in the ass, whether it be a coaching decision, personnel decision. I just don't understand what was the reasoning behind it. Because, again, you see the potential. And you saw it throughout the games in the non-conference matchups, too, which is also very infuriating.
Yeah. I think back to your point originally to start us off on this reaction, Cole, about Ole Miss's offensive line giving a bunch of TFLs. It's just they brought in some bodies, Diego Pounds, another guy, Jarian Hatcher, I think was the kid, the transfer from Washington. They brought the true Washington kids, and then Jaquan Scott, I believe, the Southern Miss kid off the top of my head. They brought in bodies, but it still just wasn't very good this year. My point, I'm saying all this to your point that you let us off with, Mississippi State and Coleman Hutzler run a 3-man front regularly. Ole Miss's stat numbers will tell you it was awesome, and they averaged 5.5 yards per. And it was, but you're right. A lot of that yardage was Ulysses Bentley's one run. It goes to show you this Ole Miss offensive line, not very good this year if you can't run on a 3-man front like Mississippi State's running. I think it kind of surprised Lane Kiffin and dude, you knew they ran a 3. Coleman Hutzler runs a 3-man front against everybody. We remember Scadaboo from Arizona State just running down their throats and making them like it.
He went crazy in that game. Which is the other
and Ole Miss, again, their numbers will tell you, hey, if you just went and looked at the box score, it's going to tell you right off the bat. Sorry, I went to the team.
It was 5.5 yards per play today, and it was
correct.
One touchdown.
It was like 54. 5 right on the dot. 51 attempts though.
That's the point.
Yeah, so I think why they can't get going in the run game is because the offensive line up front is just not very good this year. It's beat up. I don't think they really took that next step like they were expecting. And it goes back to the portal, Bear, as you know. It's like you can bring in bodies, but as we all know, the offensive line, that is a cohesive unit. It has to be. Those are guys that need to play a lot of reps together because it's not just about one guy. Who cares if the left tackle is good? If there's not 4 other guys that can help him, they all play together, it doesn't freaking matter. And I think you bring in those many guys to improve the offensive line. That's just one year. I think if maybe they all came – again, this is hypothetical. It's not happening. But if they all came back next year, I think we would see an improved lineup. I don't really think it's the individuals. I think it's just it takes a while to get cohesiveness on that unit and really across an entire football team because the sport of football is a developmental sport. We see it in college basketball. These teams get off to slow starts because no one – understands rotations. They don't get used to playing with each other. They've only had the fall to get practice. With this transfer portal in all sports, man, it takes time to develop. So I think that was always everybody's fear in the back of their head when it came to this Ole Miss roster and taking all these transfers. Is like, will they gel? Will there be any slip-ups? But I was with you, Cole. I initially didn't have them in our preseason magazine in the SEC Championship game, but right after media days, I moved Ole Miss into the SEC Championship game against Georgia. I was high on them mainly because obviously the roster was much more talented than Missouri's, but I went kind of with the same algorithm like you do. You look at schedules in this league, and they're not all created differently. They're not all created differently around college football. We've had discussions with Indiana about that. I thought with Ole Miss's schedule, and it's still, like I talked about at the beginning of the show, it was still pretty beneficial. Obviously, South Carolina was way better than they thought we'd be, but everybody else probably about the same for the most part. Like you mentioned, Florida, it's another good one. When Ole Miss played them, Florida was playing their best. Maybe if Ole Miss got them at the beginning of the year.
That's the thing is that you look at a Florida team, people will go look at that schedule and they'll say, you are what your record says you are. And you have to say to Florida, no, they're not. You watch the way they play with DJ Lagway. They're a completely different team, which again is another reason why I can't buy into the you are what your record says you are crap. Because if Ole Miss is going to finish 9-3, but Dave, you and I both know this, and same thing when it comes to South Carolina, the way they're playing right now. Those are two teams that if you get them in the playoff, I'm not sure many people want to go toe-to-toe with them when they're at their peak. Now, I'm not saying that they can't lose a game. What I am saying is the way that you looked against Kentucky and the way that you looked against LSU in the fourth quarter and the way that you shot yourself in the foot all throughout the second half against Florida, as much as Florida has turned the corner, Ole Miss was bought in for this year. And you saw the version of Ole Miss that I actually think is the real version in the South Carolina game, in the Georgia game, in the Oklahoma game in the second half. I think that you saw what the epitome of Rebel football was intended to be this upcoming year. And so this is why, again, you can say as much as you want SEC bias. You can say as much as you want that homerism plays into the role. I look at Ole Miss as a 3-loss team, and I'm not putting them in the college football playoff because if the losses are egregious. That doesn't mean that if you told me they were in the playoff, I would still not think that they were a challenging force, that if you caught them on a good day, they're going to beat you by double digits. And if you catch them on a bad day, you're going to beat them by at least a touchdown, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, Cole, I agree with that. Of the 3 9-3 teams, if South Carolina finishes the deal against Clemson tomorrow, I would say Ole Miss. If you told me pick one team who could most likely to win the whole thing out of those 3 teams, I would go Ole Miss. The only thing that concerns me is the run game. I do think against like Ohio State, Oregon, I just don't think they would. I don't think any of the 3 would win the national championship.
No.
I just think if you made me pick one, I'd probably go Ole Miss.
I would pick Ole Miss for one reason: quarterback play, and that's it. But that's it. It's not because of offensive line.
That's not a shot to Lenore Sellers or anything. I mean,
no.
I don't think Jalen Milroe can win a national championship. But yeah, I'm with you, Cole, 100%. Jackson Dart would be the reason. But and we'll say this too, Cole, and the defense. After that first quarter, I thought Pete Golden and them kind of locked in.
Sure, but at the same time, I'm not going to downplay South Carolina's defense at all. South Carolina's defense, I think, could go 4 quarters with any offense in the country and be able to at least make it a battle. But can the offense for your squad be able to deliver? And again, maybe in one game it can. Maybe in one game, Jalen Milroe or Lenore Sellers is able to ball out and have 450 total yards of offense, and they catapult their way to a double-digit victory. And Jackson Dart throws 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter, and here we are talking about a disappointing season. Before we get on out of here, Dave, Mississippi State. When you look at this Bulldog squad, did you see enough today to where you're willing to bank on, and I mean completely locked in, no questions asked, you're going to ride it out with Michael Van Buren next year? Or are you at least going to feel around and say, if there's a better option for us, we got to upgrade? Because year 1 was all about establishing a culture. Like my rules in college football, and maybe yours are different, but my 3 rules in college football go by year by year. And by year 3, I know if you're going to make it or not. Year 1 is establishing a culture. Year 2 is building a foundation. And year 3 is going big. And year 1, they established a culture. They know what they want to be. They know what they need to fix. Now it's about getting those next foundational pieces in for next year, maybe 5 or 6-6, get to a bowl game. Year 3 is where you start to swing and you go into the transfer portal. You're muted.
Sorry.
There we go.
I think the biggest blessing in disguise for Mississippi State this year was, I hate saying this because I don't want anybody to ever get hurt, was Blake Shapen going down, because Michael Van Buren has started at DKR, at Darrell K. Royal Stadium. He has started at Neyland Stadium. He started at Stanford Stadium, and he's started at Vaught Hemingway Stadium. They have the toughest road schedule all year of all the SEC teams. He started every one of those games. My point being, he's played in 8 conference games. He gets to roll into spring ball. Jeff Levy gets to go open more up. Hey, we're not just introducing stuff to this guy now. He knows what we want to do. So I'm rolling with Michael Van Buren. Again, I don't really know what the quarterback market is. I saw Caden Salter from Liberty entered it. I'm not overly high on him. I would stick with Michael Van Buren. I remember I liked him out of high school from St. Francis Academy in Baltimore. I would stay with him. The thing I would change, though, I think you got to go get a new DC, man. I think
you got to get a new DC.
CAA, Jimmy Sexton agency hire. Hey, we got you the job at Mississippi State, Jeff. You're going to hire one of our clients. His first DC job too. I think you can't win in the SEC just sitting there in 3-man fronts and letting most teams run for 250, 300. Again, it may be a quiet. I mean, if there ever is such a thing as a quiet 250, 300 on the ground, but I just think you got to get better scheme wise at Mississippi State defensively. And to be fair to them, they did. That was the worst Mississippi State defensive line personnel wise since
the first year of the damn.
Well, Lester Kroom was probably
you there. Think even worse than the first
really they've been really good traditionally. I mean, you can make the case Mississippi State is the best defensive lineman in the NFL, most of them from top to bottom. But no, I would say you got to change that. I hate firing a coordinator after 1 year, but I think there's enough there to make a change there, and you got to go improve the Mississippi State defense. Now, the thing that would scare me a little bit if I'm Mississippi State, if you're listening to the broadcast, would be the way Lane Kiffin's got to go rebuild that entire roster is them going to get their guy Smith, Isaiah Smith, the safety that his dad played at Ole Miss. That would scare me a little bit. But they need to improve the defensive personnel, to be fair to Coleman Hutzler, but I would still make a change.
Which, again, let's also throw this out here. Mississippi State, I thought, as bad as their secondary was, as bad as their defense was all year, they put Jackson Dart into fits today multiple times. That offensive line was the single most disappointing thing of this game was how pitiful the offensive line for Ole Miss looked today compared to how it looked against Georgia, compared to how it looked against South Carolina, compared to how it looked against Oklahoma, because those are great front. This is not a great front. And I think that the first person that will tell you that is Jeff Lebby himself. With that being said, I'm on board with you. I think Van Buren has shown you enough this year to where if you want to do anything, do what LSU did last season by going into the transfer portal and getting some insurance behind a guy like Garrett Nussmeier and an AJ Swan. Do something along those lines. Get an insurance piece to where if you lose him for a couple games, you feel content that your season could still stay the course. There's 3 things I'm doing. Number 1, I am going big defensively into the transfer portal. I am using most of my NIL collective to build into the transfer portal. Number 2, I'm at least going after one mid-major elite all-conference or maybe a project, but could be potential starting right tackle. And number 3, I am paying whatever I can to keep Kevin Coleman back for another year because that guy has shown up time and time again for Van Buren, for Chapin. He is a legit force. Number 3 can, I think, be a legit top 5 wide receiver in the SEC next year, especially the way that he played today. 118 yards off 9 catches. I also want to go establish myself in the run game and get a running back because if you and I both know this, the way that Jeff Lebby's offense works to a team is the veer and shoot is what I like to call it. Because if it's the vertical passing downfield with your speed threats and it's the rushing attack that's being able to set that up. If you can get a qualified running back to pair alongside with Michael Van Buren, keep a guy like Kevin Coleman around and maybe bolster up a few offensive linemen with either some 4-star talent in the recruiting trail or getting a proven guy from like the MAC or like the Sun Belt that maybe comes on in like a Troy tackle and they can continue to develop properly and you get the right development done. Mississippi State, I think, can at least get to bowl eligibility next year because of the quarterback is not the problem. The defense is the problem and the inconsistencies with the play calling, but it was year 1. The difference between Mississippi State for underwhelming this year, you can blame it on a ton of things. Loss of a running back, loss of a veteran quarterback. With Ole Miss, an easy schedule, $10 million invested via the NIL collective, a veteran quarterback that, for my money, showed you today why he is number 1 in the SEC, who just set a record in Ole Miss football history, proven commodities at wide receiver, stable defensive play, and you weren't able to get the job done against inferior competition when you got the job done against quality opponents.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. You went on there. I would say I agree with this. I was about to say, Stone Blanton started in this front 7. South Carolina fans that listen, that's all I got to tell you is Stone Blanton was a starter in this front 7 in the Southeastern Conference. Let that sink in, folks. So that proves right there alone the personnel in Mississippi State was not great. And I think now more than ever, 10 years ago, this wasn't the case. Now I think big-time receivers are difference makers. You got to have multiple. I think you got to go get some guys there. But, yeah, first of all, you got to fix things on defense first and foremost. You
got to keep Kevin Coleman. I don't care if you can offer him something compared to what is his 7th round draft grade. I pay it. I pay it. Keep that consistency. Lane Kiffin gets a win. You start a new stint out in Starkville. Hopefully things go your way, and more importantly, now you just wait. You wait for chaos. If there's anything that we know, Dave, chaos occurs in the sport on any single Saturday. And so maybe, just maybe, Ole Miss, this is enough to push them into the 12-team playoff. But like, rate, review, subscribe. Make sure that you're following us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. By the way, I know that Dave and I are backwards today because I had trouble pointing because I usually point this way. I'm supposed to point that way. So we're going to be switching for the next one because we are coming back on live. It is rivalry weekend. So we're going to be doing live shows throughout the night, throughout tomorrow, which is why you should make sure that you hit that ring notification. That way you keep up to date with everything that we're doing here on the channel. Follow Dave at Mach 10 Sports, me at Mr. Cole Thompson. Check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. The Egg Bowl is set out in Oxford. Is it enough to catapult the Rebels back into the playoffs? Peace.